In a quiet village nestled between rolling hills and winding rivers, there lived a girl whose presence seemed to illuminate even the dullest corners of her world. Her hair, long and flowing like molten night, cascaded down her back in waves that caught the sunlight and glimmered as if woven from strands of gold and shadow. From a distance, villagers often whispered about it, their voices laced with awe, curiosity, and envy. They said that her hair was not ordinary, that it held a power beyond human understanding, a secret that pulsed faintly, a hidden energy that seemed alive. The girl herself, however, was unassuming. Despite the whispers and glances that followed her through the marketplace, along the dusty roads and past the riverbanks, she remained humble. She would greet the villagers with a shy nod, help an elderly neighbor carry water, or share a bundle of firewood with a struggling family. Her kindness radiated in quiet ways that drew admiration as naturally as the river drew reeds to its banks. Children often followed her at a distance, fascinated by the shimmer of her hair, though some dared to call out teasingly, "Magic hair! Magic hair!" She would simply smile, an expression that held patience and grace, never anger. Yet not all were so innocent in their admiration. Where awe and wonder blossomed, envy quietly festered. Certain villagers, their hearts clouded by jealousy or greed, began to see her as a threat rather than a blessing. They noticed how merchants sought her counsel on which herbs cured the sick, how farmers relied on her to bless their crops, and how her presence seemed to lift the spirits of the weary. In their minds, the girl's gentle nature and her radiant hair combined to create a power that might one day overshadow them all. Whispers of discontent began to weave through the village like a creeping vine. "It's unnatural," some muttered, "too perfect to be mere luck." Others went further, claiming that the girl's hair had cursed the land with prosperity in her favor, leaving others to struggle. Despite the undercurrent of jealousy, the girl continued her days unchanged. She woke with the sun, brushing the night's dew from her hair, untangling each delicate strand with hands that had long grown accustomed to careful care. She tended the garden her family owned, offering blooms to those in need, her hair spilling over her shoulders like a protective curtain. In the evenings she would sit near the river, letting the wind lift her hair and catching her reflection in the water. The villagers who watched from a distance could see the subtle shimmer that seemed to flow through her strands, a light that rippled as though carrying a secret rhythm of its own. Her family, though not unkind, often treated her with a mixture of pride and caution. Her stepmother, in particular, viewed the girl's beauty and grace with a mixture of resentment and opportunism. She admired the power her stepdaughter's hair seemed to command over the villagers but feared the attention might one day eclipse her own position in the family. The girl's father, gentle but distracted, rarely noticed the growing tension, absorbed as he was in his work and the affairs of the village. This imbalance in the household meant the girl's life, though outwardly peaceful, carried a quiet tension beneath the surface. It was said among the elders that the girl's hair was a gift inherited from her mother, a woman of extraordinary virtue and wisdom who had passed before the girl reached an age to remember clearly. The mother's spirit, villagers whispered, lingered within the strands, lending them their mystical luster. Some claimed that when the girl slept, the hair would twitch, coil, or sway as if alive, responding to dreams and hidden currents of magic in the world. Others, more skeptical, laughed at such tales, dismissing them as folklore meant to entertain children. Yet the village children would testify, wide-eyed, of moments when the hair seemed to move without wind, or shimmered unnaturally under moonlight, casting strange patterns on walls and paths. For all the magic woven into her hair, the girl remained grounded, aware of the envy it invoked but untainted by it. She understood that her beauty and the whispers surrounding it were not the measure of her worth. She spent time helping others in ways that did not draw attention, repairing broken tools, mending torn clothing, or gathering herbs for the sick. Yet even in these quiet acts, the hair shone, catching light and shadow alike, as if celebrating her humility. By the riverbank, where she often went to collect water and soothe the mind after long hours of labor, the reflection of her hair in the rippling currents seemed to captivate all who glimpsed it. Men and women alike would pause, staring for a moment, as if trying to decipher the mystery of the girl who carried such beauty and power so effortlessly. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, she would vanish into the village streets, her hair trailing like a living river behind her, leaving those who had watched to ponder the magic they could neither touch nor understand. In essence, the girl with enchanted hair lived at the intersection of wonder and envy, her days marked by quiet acts of goodness, yet shadowed by growing tension. Her nature drew admiration, and her hair drew desire and fear. The villagers' whispered awe and hidden resentment set the stage for what would come next, A story where innocence, envy and magic would intertwine in ways that no one, not even the girl herself, could fully anticipate. The threads of envy that wove through the village promised that her gift, her very existence, would not remain a mere legend of beauty and kindness, but would eventually stir the forces of retribution, awakening the true power hidden in her radiant strands. In the narrow lanes of the village, where the wind carried both scents of cooking fires and the hushed murmurs of the people, envy began to grow like a silent weed. The girl with the radiant, enchanted hair had always moved through the village with humility, unaware of the currents of jealousy that began to swirl around her. Yet the beauty and grace she carried so effortlessly drew more than admiration. It drew suspicion, resentment, and quiet malice. Those who once smiled at her presence now whispered in corners, their voices hushed but venomous, seeding plots that would fester over time. It started with small remarks, almost imperceptible at first. A villager might mutter, "She is too perfect, too blessed," under their breath while passing the girl in the market. Another would say, "Such hair is unnatural, perhaps it carries curses," while pretending to adjust a basket of produce. The whispers were deliberate, carefully measured to plant doubt without revealing the speaker's own envy. Over time, these murmurs wove a network of suspicion throughout the village, wrapping the girl in invisible chains of fear and resentment. Even her relatives, who were supposed to care for her, began to look at her differently, their eyes reflecting a mixture of awe, jealousy, and the seed of darker intentions. The girl, immersed in her daily routines, fetching water, tending the small garden and helping neighbors, remained largely unaware. Her focus was always on kindness, on offering what help she could without expectation of reward or praise. Yet everywhere she went, eyes followed, calculating, measuring the influence she unknowingly commanded. Mothers who once praised her for her humility now warned their children to stay away from her magic hair, while fathers muttered about the luck she seemed to carry, luck that left others struggling in the shade of her light. Jealousy did not limit itself to the villagers. Some of her own relatives, particularly those with ambitions or insecurities, saw her as an obstacle. Her stepmother, who had long maintained a fragile hold over the household, began to view the girl's hair not as a gift but as a challenge to her authority. Every compliment, every nod of respect the girl received, became a slight, a reminder of her own inadequacies. Night after night, she would lie awake, her mind simmering with silent resentment, plotting subtle ways to undermine the girl without revealing her true intentions to others. Even among the young women of the village, the seeds of envy sprouted quickly. They whispered about her hair's flowing brilliance, claiming that it shone too brightly, too magically. She must have made some deal with spirits, one would say, eyeing the girl as she passed. Another whispered that the girl's hair held a dangerous power, one that could influence hearts, minds, and even the luck of farmers in the fields. While the statements were cloaked as concern, each carried the sting of jealousy, designed to isolate and alienate her slowly from the community she had always tried to help. The conspiracies remained hidden at first, subtle and seemingly inconsequential. Villagers exchanged looks, leaning close when the girl walked by, speaking in tones just low enough to escape her hearing. "Perhaps if she is distracted, her hair will lose its charm," one would murmur. "Maybe then she will no longer shine above the rest of us," another would add. Over time, these whispered suggestions began to solidify into plans, connecting those who felt wronged or overshadowed into a network of quiet malice. What started as jealousy grew into deliberate scheming, aimed at diminishing her light and, if possible, taking control of the mysterious power her hair represented. Even the children, who had once followed her in admiration, began to repeat the whispers they overheard. "She has magic hair," one child would tell another. "It's why she is always helped and praised." Innocent words, yet they became tools in the web of envy that entangled the girl. Her influence, her kindness, and the supernatural shimmer in her hair were all used against her in whispered plots that only grew bolder as the days passed. At night, the girl would sit by the river or near her small hearth, unaware of the quiet conspiracy forming. The wind seemed to carry not only her own laughter or the sound of the river but also the silent plotting of those who wished her harm. Every compliment she received, every admiring glance from a villager, was mirrored by jealousy in another. The whispers grew louder in private homes, in corners of the marketplace, and behind the walls of her own house. The harmony of her world was eroding slowly, replaced by schemes fueled by envy and fear of what her hair represented. It was in these quiet moments, between the whispers and the plotting, that the seeds of the future conflict were sown. The girl's hair, radiant and shimmering with a mysterious life of its own, became both a symbol of her innocence and the catalyst for the malice festering in the village. The envy that had once been dormant was now awake, coiling like a serpent, waiting for the right moment to strike. The villagers, blinded by jealousy, could not see that their whispers, so soft and hidden, would soon grow into actions that could not be undone. In the heart of the village, the tension thickened like a storm approaching the horizon. The girl continued her days with humility, unknowingly walking on the thin line between admiration and destruction. Every glance from the villagers, every hushed conversation she could not hear, was a small step toward the inevitable. The whispers of envy, once soft and seemingly harmless, were preparing the stage for events that would forever change the life of the girl with enchanted hair, her family, and the entire village. In the days that followed the spreading whispers of envy, the girl began to notice subtle changes around her. At first they were almost imperceptible, a bird pausing mid-flight to hover near her window, a stray cat arching its back and staring, or the wind shifting unnaturally when she walked through the village. She felt it as a tingling along her scalp, as if her hair itself were alive, sensing the intent of those around her. Though she had always known her hair to be beautiful and extraordinary, she had never imagined it could possess an awareness, a subtle intelligence that reacted to malice. One afternoon, while walking past the market, a merchant's eyes lingered too long, filled with resentment masked as admiration. The moment his gaze fell upon her hair, the basket of fruits he carried tumbled to the ground with a crash, startling him and drawing the attention of everyone nearby. The girl paused, momentarily alarmed, noticing how the shadows around the merchant seemed to shift unnaturally, curling as if to warn her. She felt a fluttering in her chest, an instinctive warning that told her not all eyes on her were friendly. Animals, it seemed, were more perceptive than humans. The village dogs, usually indifferent to passers-by, would bark aggressively at those who plotted against her, circling and growling at invisible currents of ill will. Chickens scattered in a frenzy when envious relatives approached her home, their feathers ruffling as though touched by a ghostly hand. Even the village horses, calm and dependable creatures, would hesitate as she passed, stamping their hooves nervously, ears pricked toward people she had always considered harmless. It became increasingly clear that her hair was a beacon, a silent sentinel that sensed those who carried malice. At home, the girl began to notice shadows behaving unnaturally. In the candlelight, corners of the room would darken abruptly when someone with ill intent drew near. The shadows seemed to stretch, reaching out like silent fingers, and occasionally, a reflection in a polished pot or window would twist slightly, showing not her own reflection but a fleeting glimpse of anger or cruelty from the observer. Each time this happened, the girl's heart quickened, and her hand instinctively brushed her hair back, as though it might shield her from the unseen gaze. One evening, while gathering water from the river, she sensed a presence lurking near the reeds. The air grew heavy, and the usual gentle rustle of the water was replaced by an unnatural stillness. Her hair rose slightly on her neck, as though reacting to a warning carried on the breeze. A figure emerged, a relative known for whispered malice, and immediately the river water splashed wildly, as if startled by the person's ill intentions. Ducks and fish darted away from the approaching figure, creating ripples and splashes that seemed to serve as a caution to her. The girl stepped back, her eyes wide, realizing that her hair had been reacting long before she even saw the danger. At night, in the quiet of her small room, the girl began noticing even more subtle signals. Threads of her hair would lift and sway gently, responding to thoughts and emotions she could not see. Sometimes, when someone with envy in their heart was nearby, she would feel a cold prickling sensation along her scalp, almost like the touch of 1,000 invisible fingers. The shadows cast by the flickering candle would stretch unnaturally, bending toward the direction of hidden malice. Her pulse would quicken, and she realized that her hair was more than beautiful. It was a shield, a warning system she had not yet learned to control. Even the wind seemed to carry messages. When envious villagers plotted in secret, a sudden gust would stir her hair in sharp, sudden movements, almost as if the strands were whispering to her, guiding her attention toward danger. Leaves on the ground would scatter, falling in patterns that seemed too deliberate to be natural. Her intuition sharpened with each day. She began to notice which expressions, which whispered words, were precursors to acts of malice. It was as though her hair, her connection to some ancient power, allowed her to sense the invisible currents of envy and fear around her. The girl began keeping a mental map of these warning signs. If a dog barked or a shadow flickered in an odd way, she would take note of who had recently passed by. If the wind stirred her hair sharply, she would remember who had spoken ill of her. Each incident reinforced the realization that her hair was alive in more than a physical sense. It was attuned to human intentions, especially those that carried harm. With every reaction she grew more aware, more cautious, and yet more confident that she was not entirely defenseless against the schemers. As the days passed, the villagers themselves began to sense the strange atmosphere surrounding the girl. The ones who intended ill started to notice odd occurrences, animals avoiding them, objects tipping over mysteriously, and shadows that seemed to respond to their own anger. Fear began to seed itself alongside their envy, though they did not yet connect it to the girl's presence. Only the girl understood fully that her hair and the natural world were allies, reacting in subtle ways to the malice that she could feel but not yet see. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting long golden shadows across the village, the girl stood at the edge of the forest and felt an undeniable vibration through her hair. Something dark approached, a villager with the cruelest intentions of all, and instantly her hair bristled, standing as if alive, the strands shimmering in the fading light. The forest animals scattered, and even the river seemed to murmur warnings. She stepped back, realizing that her hair's warning signs were not just reactions. They were a form of protection, preparing her for events that were about to unfold. By the time night fully descended, the girl understood the true power of her hair. Every flicker of shadow, every nervous glance from an animal, every prickle along her scalp had meaning. She was no longer merely a girl with enchanted hair, she was a force intertwined with nature itself, a being whose strands sensed malice, who could feel intentions before they manifested. The village, blind in its envy and hatred, had begun to stir a power that it could not yet comprehend. The girl's extraordinary hair had become the subject of constant gossip, murmurs that began as small whispers but grew into conspiratorial schemes. At first it was a few jealous relatives who muttered under their breath during communal gatherings, hinting that the girl's beauty and charm were unnatural, perhaps even dangerous. Then villagers who once smiled politely began casting wary glances, their admiration tinged with fear. To them, her hair was more than mere strands, it was power incarnate, a living thing that could not be trusted. The idea took root slowly, a dark seed that grew into obsession. It was in the evenings, under the dim flicker of lanterns, that the conspirators would meet. A cousin, whose envy had festered for years, whispered urgently about the strength that supposedly resided in each silken lock. "If we take it," he said, his eyes gleaming, "she will be like any other girl. She will obey us powerless." Another relative, a step-uncle known for his sly manipulations, nodded thoughtfully. "Her hair is unnatural. The longer it grows, the more she holds sway over everything around her. We cannot allow her to walk free while we tremble in her shadow." Their voices were low but determined, filled with a conviction born of fear and greed rather than reason. As the plot developed, the villagers began assigning roles. One would distract her with a fabricated need for help, an urgent chore or a call for assistance in the fields. Another would be tasked with approaching her quietly while she was occupied, armed with scissors sharp enough to sever the magical strands. Even the youngest, who might otherwise have hesitated, was told to ensure the girl did not suspect anything until the moment it was too late. They argued over details. Which time of day was best, whether the act should happen in her home or outside in a clearing where no one could intervene, and how to prevent anyone from hearing her cries. Every element was meticulously planned, their determination fueled by a mixture of fear, greed, and envy. Meanwhile, the girl began to sense the tension. The usual warning signs from her hair, the subtle tingling along her scalp, the restless movement of animals nearby, the shifting of shadows, had intensified. Birds that once chirped joyfully now circled nervously above her, as if trying to warn her. Even the wind seemed to carry an unnatural weight, rustling her hair and whispering faintly through the trees. The girl's intuition told her that eyes were upon her, and not all were friendly. Something dark was brewing, and she felt the hair along her neck respond with a shiver of anticipation, alerting her to the approaching danger. At the meeting, one particularly bold villager voiced his plan aloud, speaking of cutting her hair while she slept. The others murmured assent, calculating the benefits. "Once her hair is ours," said the man with a sharp grin, "she will be bound by our power. No more tricks, no more strange happenings. She will be like any other girl, obedient and harmless." The group nodded in agreement, their fear of the unknown eclipsed by their desire to dominate and control. They did not pause to consider the girl herself, her feelings, or the possibility that her hair was more than they could comprehend. Even as the conspirators plotted, the girl's hair began to respond more actively. Strands lifted gently, curling in the direction of those who intended harm. She felt a subtle pulse, a vibration through her scalp that was not discomfort but awareness. Her hair was telling her that something was coming, a danger woven into the air itself. The village animals, usually indifferent to human disputes, sensed it too. Dogs growled low in their throats, cats hissed and arched their backs, and birds scattered as the humans plotted their misdeed. The girl knew, without fully understanding how, that her hair had already detected the conspiracy, and it was preparing to defend her. In the days leading up to the intended act, the conspirators became more desperate. Their whispers grew frantic. Every innocent gesture from the girl seemed to them a sign of defiance. The cousins spoke in hushed tones about observing her, watching when she brushed her hair, when she walked past the fields, and when she interacted with animals. Each movement of her hair, each ripple in the sunlight, was scrutinized and dissected, turning her natural grace into evidence of threat. They spoke of the consequences of failure. If the hair retained its power, their own standing in the village would be diminished, and their fears of her influence would become reality. Even as the plot tightened, the girl's own awareness deepened. She noticed patterns, the way shadows bent toward those harboring malice, the subtle prickle when someone thought cruel thoughts, and the uncanny stillness of nature when danger approached. Her hair, more than mere strands of beauty, was a sentinel, reacting instinctively to the schemes being hatched around her. Birds, animals, and even the wind seemed to communicate the approaching threat. The girl realized that she was no longer just a passive observer of her fate. The strands on her head, alive with strange energy, were a force ready to counteract the cruelty being plotted. As night fell, the conspirators finalized their plan. Every detail was laid out: timing, location, tools, and roles. Each person believed they were clever, that their combined cunning would ensure the girl's obedience. They did not know that the very hair they sought to control had sensed them long before they even conceived their plan. They did not realize that the girl's quiet strength, her connection to the world around her, and the subtle power in her hair would transform their scheme into their undoing. Their plotting, born of fear and envy, was about to awaken a force far beyond their understanding. And so the stage was set. The villagers and relatives believed they held the advantage, that they could seize her hair and her supposed power. Little did they know, the hair was already aware, alive with anticipation, ready to protect its rightful owner. The conspiracy formed in the shadows, but its outcome would not be what they expected. The girl, unknowingly, stood at the center of a plan that would awaken forces of vengeance beyond imagination. The night was heavy and still, the moon casting only a thin, silver light through the small cracks in the windows. The village seemed to slumber, unaware of the dark intentions creeping toward the girl's home. Inside, she lay in quiet repose, her hair spread around her like a river of midnight, glinting faintly in the moonlight. Each strand seemed almost alive, reflecting an inner luminescence that made it appear otherworldly. The conspirators moved in silence, their breaths shallow, their footsteps careful not to betray their presence. They had come armed with scissors, knives, and a determination fueled by jealousy, envy, and the belief that the girl's power could be seized in one swift act. The leader of the group, a man whose envy had festered for years, motioned for the others to halt at the edge of the room. "Remember," he whispered, "no mistakes. Tonight we take what is ours. Her hair and with it, her obedience." His voice was tense but resolute. The others nodded, their eyes glinting with a mix of fear and excitement. They had planned this night meticulously, believing that every precaution would ensure their success. Little did they know that the very thing they coveted, the hair itself, was aware and ready. As they crept closer, the girl stirred slightly, her body still, but a subtle pulse of awareness ran along her scalp. Though she had not yet opened her eyes, her hair moved in small, imperceptible waves, sensing the presence of those who meant her harm. A soft breeze, or perhaps a whisper from the strands themselves, passed through the room, rustling the hair around her shoulders. The intruders paused, sensing an almost imperceptible tension in the air. Some of them shivered, dismissing it as a draft, while others felt an inexplicable unease that made their grip on the knives tighten. The first conspirator reached out, scissors poised above the dark tresses. He leaned closer, imagining the moment when each strand would fall into his hands, the girl rendered powerless. Yet, as his fingers brushed against the hair, a strange resistance arose. The strand seemed to coil lightly around his fingers, sending a chill up his arm. He recoiled slightly, muttering a curse under his breath. The second conspirator, noticing the hesitation, stepped forward, insisting that they act quickly. "Do it now before she wakes," he hissed, his voice sharp with urgency. Suddenly, the hair reacted in a way no one expected. A single strand shot upward, striking the man's cheek like a whip. His eyes widened in terror and he stumbled back, dropping the scissors with a clatter. The girl's hair seemed to writhe as if alive, each strand moving independently, sensing danger and responding to it. Shadows in the corners of the room lengthened unnaturally, stretching toward the intruders, while the moonlight glimmered on the hair as though illuminating the impending justice. The conspirators froze, panic beginning to take root in their hearts. The leader tried again, this time with a knife, his hand shaking as he approached. But the moment the blade neared her hair, it twisted and slithered like a living serpent, striking his wrist. A cry of pain escaped him, sharp and sudden, breaking the stillness of the night. The others gasped, fear overtaking their greed. Their carefully laid plan began to unravel as the hair reacted to their intentions, coiling around their arms, slipping between fingers and striking without mercy. Each attempt to cut or seize the hair was met with resistance so swift and precise that it seemed to anticipate their every move. As the struggle continued, the room itself seemed to pulse with energy. Shadows deepened and moved, responding to the hair's will. The wind outside rose, rattling the shutters and lifting stray leaves into the room. A low hum filled the air, almost a chant, vibrating through the intruder's bones. They were no longer dealing with a mere girl, they were confronting a force of nature, a guardian woven from strands of silk and magic. Panic fully took hold. One by one the conspirators tried to retreat, but the hair's influence extended like invisible threads, brushing against their skin and eliciting flinches, stumbles and cries. The girl remained asleep, yet her power radiated outward, turning the room into a battlefield of shadows, sound and motion. The intruders' greed and cruelty were met with swift and uncanny retribution. The scissors, knives and other tools meant for harm became useless against the living strands that moved with thought and purpose. Those who had been bold in plotting her demise now trembled in helpless terror, realizing that their victim was far from powerless. The hair was not simply defending itself, it was protecting the essence of the girl, the life and spirit that had been underestimated. Finally, the conspirators, battered by fear and the strange resistance of the hair, fled into the night. Some tripped over furniture, some stumbled into walls, and some simply dropped to the floor, unable to comprehend what had occurred. The girl remained untouched, her hair perfectly intact, flowing around her as if nothing had happened. The moonlight fell gently across her face, serene and undisturbed, highlighting her innocence amidst the chaos that had unfolded. Outside, the night settled once more, but the air was charged with the memory of what had transpired. By morning, the villagers who dared peek through windows found her safe, unaware of the exact horrors that had unfolded the night before. The conspirators nursed their wounds and their terror, each silently vowing never to challenge her again. Whispers spread, describing the living hair that defended its owner with uncanny precision. Tales of the night circulated, warning others that envy and cruelty would not succeed where nature itself had chosen a guardian. The girl awoke with no memory of resistance but with her hair unbroken, more radiant than ever. Though she could not see the fear etched into the eyes of those around her, she sensed it in the subtle shifts of the air, the hushed tones of whispers, and the wary distance people kept. She had survived the first attempt, and the world would learn that her hair was no ordinary hair. It was a force, a sentinel, a protector that turned the cruelty of others back upon them. The night was still, but charged with a tension that seemed to vibrate through every corner of the room. The girl slept quietly, oblivious to the malicious intent that had crept in once again. Her hair, flowing like a dark waterfall over the pillow and down her back, shimmered faintly in the soft moonlight. Each strand seemed alive, pulsating with a latent energy, a silent guardian waiting for the moment when it would be needed. The conspirators, emboldened by greed and envy, crept toward her, their hearts pounding in anticipation. Their hands trembled as they reached for the scissors, convinced that a single snip would seize the power they coveted. The leader, a man whose envy had grown over years of watching the girl's untainted beauty and kindness, took the first step. He positioned himself directly above her, scissors poised above a single thick strand of her hair. The others waited in hushed anticipation, their eyes wide, their breaths shallow, each imagining the triumph that would soon be theirs. But as the scissors closed around the first strand, a tremor ran through it, an unnatural motion that made the man freeze. The strand twisted and writhed, slipping from between the blades with a life of its own. In a flash, the strand elongated, thickening and coiling into the unmistakable shape of a snake. Its scales glimmered under the moonlight, reflecting silvers and blacks, eyes gleaming with an intelligence far beyond any ordinary creature. The conspirator screamed, jerking backward as the snake lunged at him. Its fangs sank into his arm with shocking precision, and a searing pain shot through his body. He stumbled and fell, thrashing as the venom coursed through him, and his cries echoed violently through the room. The other conspirators froze for a split second, stunned by what they were witnessing. Fear replaced greed instantly. They had expected to take power, not face a living manifestation of it. The snake twisted and hissed, striking again at anyone who dared approach the girl. Its movements were swift, coordinated, almost as if it could anticipate the conspirators' intentions before they acted. Panic spread like wildfire. One tried to swing a knife at it, but the snake dodged effortlessly, striking at his wrist and sending him sprawling backward in terror. The girl remained asleep, serene, her chest rising and falling gently, completely unaware of the chaos erupting around her. Yet every movement of the snake seemed guided by her essence, her will embodied in the living Strand. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch unnaturally, twisting and undulating with the snake's movement, amplifying the sense of dread. The intruders had entered what they believed was a simple room, a place to steal what they desired. Now it was a chamber of judgment, and each of them realized far too late that they were its prey. The first man who had attempted the cut writhed on the floor, clutching his bitten arm as the venom spread. His face turned pale, his breath shallow and uneven. The others screamed in alarm, scrambling to retreat, but the snake moved with a predatory precision, striking again and again. One by one their attacks were deflected. One by one they were bitten, thrown or sent crashing against walls and furniture. Chaos reigned, their whispered plots and careful strategies obliterated by the relentless force that had emerged from the girl's hair. The living Strand, now fully transformed into a small but lethal serpent, circled the girl's bed like a coiled shadow, eyes never leaving the intruders. Each hiss was a warning, each movement a judgment. Panic had stripped them of any coherence, and their attempts to attack the snake were met with either avoidance or precise, painful retribution. The air was thick with terror. The room itself seemed alive, vibrating with a sinister energy that no one could explain. In a desperate attempt to salvage their plan, one conspirator lunged forward with a second pair of scissors, aiming to sever another strand. The snake struck preemptively, sinking its fangs into his hand. His scream was sharp, terror-laden, and the others staggered back, realizing that every strand they touched might retaliate in the same deadly manner. Some tried to flee, stumbling over furniture, crashing into walls, or tripping over one another in sheer panic. The snake followed, not in mindless pursuit, but with calculated precision, striking only those who had intended harm, leaving the girl untouched and serene. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling shutters and lifting loose leaves into the night. A low hum, almost like a chant, emanated from the hair-turned serpent, filling the intruders' ears with a sense of impending doom. Their greed and cruelty, which had guided them this far, now weighed heavily upon them, making their every movement clumsy and ineffective. The girl's hair, her natural power, had become a force of retribution, a living testament to the idea that envy and malice could never triumph over innocence. By the time the night waned, the conspirators who remained alive were battered, terrified, and humiliated. The first strand had proven to be more than a mere lock of hair. It was a sentinel, a guardian, a weapon that transformed their cruelty into their own suffering. The girl awoke the next morning, unaware of the serpentine guardian that had protected her, but stronger for it. The conspirators, nursing bites and venom, spread stories of the night, each whisper amplifying the legend of her hair. The first strand had done more than defend. It had taught the village a lesson that would not soon be forgotten. The hair of the innocent is never powerless, and every act of envy carries a weight that can strike back in ways unimaginable. The night air was thick with tension, and the village seemed unusually quiet, as if holding its breath in anticipation of what was about to unfold. Word of the girl's enchanted hair had spread, though few truly understood its power. Those who sought to exploit it had already learned that the first strand alone could turn their schemes into nightmares. But greed and envy are tenacious, and despite the warnings, several of the conspirators had returned, believing they could finish what they had begun. They approached with renewed determination, clutching scissors and knives, hearts hammering with both excitement and fear. No sooner had the first blade sliced through a strand than the hair responded in a way that left them trembling. Each severed strand writhed and elongated, scales glimmering under the dim torchlight. Before their eyes, the strands transformed into snakes, sinuous and alive, their eyes gleaming with the intelligence of a predator. A hiss cut through the night like a blade, and one by one, the snakes struck with terrifying precision. The first conspirator, a man who had laughed at the girl's humility and mocked her simple nature, felt a searing pain as the snake bit his arm. He yelped and stumbled backward, only to find that the venom spread with unnatural speed. The second snake struck at another, sinking its fangs into the leg of a woman who had whispered lies to tarnish the girl's reputation. Her scream pierced the night, echoing off the village walls, a chilling testament to the hare's newfound wrath. Panic spread among the conspirators. They had thought the hare a mere trinket, a symbol of beauty and wealth. Now it was a weapon of divine retribution, punishing cruelty with unerring accuracy. Their screams intertwined, creating a chorus of terror that reverberated through the empty streets outside. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching and twisting, moving in tandem with the snakes. Those who had plotted against her found themselves cornered in the very rooms they had once used to mock and belittle her, as if the village itself had joined in her defense. Each strand that was cut became a separate snake, each one with a mind of its own. They did not strike blindly, they remembered the harm done, seeking out those whose hearts were filled with envy and malice. One man tried to flee, climbing over a fence in desperation, but a snake coiled around his ankle, dragging him back into the center of the chaos. Another attempted to shield himself with a torch, only to find the flames bending unnaturally, casting distorted shadows that seemed to mock his terror before a snake struck his hand and silenced his cries. The girl remained at the center, her hair cascading around her like a living crown. Though she slept, or appeared to, every movement of the hare was guided by her essence. The serpents struck in patterns that were almost artistic in their precision, weaving through the conspirators, leaving only chaos in their wake. Their laughter, once so cruel and confident, had evaporated entirely, replaced by gasps, screams, and pleading that went unheard. Villagers from nearby houses, awakened by the commotion, peered through windows and doors, only to see a scene that seemed impossible. Snakes of glowing hair slithered with purpose, striking only those whose hands had sought to harm the girl. The observers felt both fear and awe, understanding for the first time that the girl's hair was no ordinary hair, and her power could not be challenged. Whispers began immediately. "The hair judges the heart," they said. "It strikes those who carry malice within." Even those who had remained on the edges, hoping to capitalize on the chaos without taking direct action, found themselves caught in the serpentine web. One by one, the snakes sought them out, sensing their complicity in the plots that had endangered the girl. A man who had only whispered encouragement to the others was bitten in the shoulder, his strength draining away as if the venom was not just physical but moral, stripping away his arrogance and leaving him trembling. Outside, the village seemed alive with energy. Doors slammed, shutters rattled, and the wind carried the anguished screams through the streets. Every light flickered as if warning the remaining villagers to beware. The snakes moved with an almost sentient awareness, ensuring that no one who had plotted against the girl remained unpunished. Their cries were mirrored by the terrified whispers of those who had not participated but watched silently, reminding everyone that envy and cruelty had consequences far beyond what they could imagine. By the time dawn approached, the chaos had reached its peak. The snakes had fulfilled their task, leaving the guilty battered, venomous, and shaken to their core. The girl remained untouched, her hair falling around her like a protective veil, each strand a silent guardian. Survivors, few in number, spread tales of the night, each recounting the terror of the hare that had become living judgment. The legend of her enchanted hair grew, whispered from house to house, village to village. The snakes, born from strands of hair meant to mock, had become instruments of divine justice. Every cut that had been intended to diminish her beauty instead revealed the true power of her innocence and the inescapable consequences of envy. The conspirators learned a lesson they would never forget. Malice has a price, and those who underestimate the strength of the pure-hearted often pay it in ways they cannot foresee. From that night forward, the girl walked among her people with a quiet confidence, her hair flowing freely, a reminder that the innocent carry power beyond the reach of greed, and that every act of cruelty has the potential to rise against those who commit it.